Okay, so Frank Gaffney's here with me, Center for Security Policy, securefreedom.org, counterjihad.com, also presentdangerchina.org for his committee on the present danger China, where he's vice president there. Frank, let's talk about China and give us an update on the Hong Kong protests that continue to go on, and Hong Kong protesters allegedly firebombing China's Xinhua news agency. Carrie Lam, the CEO, as she's called, of Hong Kong, finally meeting with Xi Jinping. They took a bunch of nice photos together. What are we to make of all this?
I think what's happening behind the scenes, Alex, is what I frankly have long expected would take place once the 70th anniversary of the establishment of the People's Republic of China was behind Xi Jinping in the beginning of October. And that is the kind of boa constrictor effect on the people of Hong Kong. It's tightening inexorably. I don't know that we're going to see a Tiananmen Square style invasion and crackdown of the terribly violent kind. We may. It may ultimately have to come to that in order for China to accomplish what I think they have in mind. But what they're doing in the meantime is they're signaling, for example, by indicating that they're going to be changing the rules by which the chief executive is selected and other government officials. It's already, essentially their wholly owned subsidiary, but apparently they're going to make it even more draconian. They're also denying people the use of social media platforms as a means of communicating and, in some cases, organizing these protests. And I think you're going to continue to see arrests of individuals. You're going to see people and who knows who's doing some of this violence. There's been a lot of reporting that it's provocateurs, not just the people of Hong Kong who are in the streets, by and large, peacefully protesting. So this is what I think is in store. And I have to say, Alex, that I'm afraid that what is increasingly in prospect is not simply a crackdown in Hong Kong, but I think that the Chinese government is increasingly preparing for actual action against Taiwan as well.
I think so too. I think Hong Kong is a testing. I think they're testing this out, and I think
we will respond.
Sure. So, and how are we responding, and how should we be responding?
I don't think enough, frankly. I think the president has, over time, expressed a bit more solidarity with the people of Hong Kong than he did initially. I think there's been a tendency to take the view that, well, this is, China's problem and internal to China. And I think he has indicated more and more that, we actually do stand with the people of Hong Kong. And I think we need to reinforce that in a very tangible way by making it clear to the Chinese government that if they actually do deny what autonomy the people of Hong Kong were promised by them for the next couple of decades, they will be denied the kind of arrangements, trade arrangements, most favored nation status, effectively, that the Chinese have been exploiting through Hong Kong to make large amounts of money. That would be a powerful signal of reinforcement. And I think we also need to make clear we stand with the people of Taiwan, too.
Yeah, certainly. Absolutely. And it's tough to do that because China lives by the one China policy where they think it's all China. And this is a big deal. And they fight for their territory. So both economically and in terms of the battle of ideas by controlling the internet. There's a big story out on how internet freedom has decreased over the last 10 years. And for the fourth year in a row, China is the least free country on earth out of all of them. Right. They're the least free for the internet. Right. And that's a big deal when our number one geopolitical foe at the moment does not have free information at all, the least free. That is a big deal, Frank.
Well, it's big deal in two ways. One, it calls to mind the famous statement by Bill Clinton that good luck when he was talking about the Chinese trying to control the internet. Well, sure. They've had what they needed, luck as well as hard work. And they are garroting their people through that means, among others, by denying them information. At the same time, they're taking the fullest possible advantage of our freedom of communication and expression. There's no reciprocity between the Chinese government and their propagandizing here, including, by the way, as you know, Alex, through the Washington Post and the New York Times, which run regularly these expensive advertising supplements that to the untutored eye, look like they're just another news item in the newspaper. But it's Chinese state propaganda. And we have no similar corresponding access to the people of China. And that's just one of the examples of a lack of reciprocity that shouldn't
Sure, and for years we've incorporated Chinese state propaganda into our entertainment product so that we can get into the China market. There's some notable examples of people making edits and writing plots and rewriting plots in order to comply with whatever the Chinese Communist Party demands in order to get into the communist market. But this is becoming slightly less popular. Which is great because you'd notice the uproar over the NBA was very welcome, and how they're very woke about President Trump and gun control, but they're not very woke when it comes to concentration camps in China. Then all of a sudden they plead the fifth on that one, or they plead ignorance.
But I think just on that quickly, I think the American people are generally of the view, and rightly so, that China is a threat. Whether it's an economic threat, whether it's increasingly a threat in terms of human rights, or even militarily. And this is a message I think Donald Trump has done a lot to help inform and needs to be even more forcefully articulating going into this election. Because I personally believe, as I know our friend Steve Bannon does, this is likely to be one of the issues on which the American people will focus in 2020 and will want somebody who is going to be robust rather than somebody like Joe Biden who is going to tell you it's not a problem.
He can't decide if it's a problem or not. He changes his mind every other day.
Right.
So, but here's a pattern, and this is fascinating that John Carney's been tracking, our economic and finance editor, that trade with the United States and China is declining at a fairly rapid rate. So I grew up during a time where buying products from China was becoming less and less fashionable because of health concerns for children. It was all cheaply made on semi-slave labor, if not outright slave labor. So kids were not supposed to get toys from China. Now it's becoming more fashionable to not sell to China as well, not to do business with China because they're such human rights abusers. It's barely creeping into the public consciousness, but this could be a very big development, not just for our values, but also for the economy as well, if it becomes less and less fashionable to do business with China. Because I'll tell you that this is, if you read Newt Gingrich's latest book on China, which is in many ways kind of a follow-up to Michael Pillsbury's 100-Year Marathon, it's at least in concept, it makes you not want to do a dime's worth of business in China, period. And if that becomes fashionable, that will really change the way our economy functions.
It'll be interesting to see. My sense of it, Alex, is that what's really working there is most of the American companies that have been doing business in China or trying to do business in China have figured out it's a loser. What they've wound up having to do is transfer most of their seed corn technologies or stand idly by as it's been stolen from them. And they're not actually getting access to the Chinese market. Or if it is, it's very fleeting because in short order, Chinese competitors who've gotten that technology will then be supplanting them, and the Chinese will preferentially give them the business rather than the Americans. So I think it's resulting in, as the president said the other day in Kentucky, companies are leaving China. They're coming back. They're manufacturing here or maybe in Vietnam or India or someplace else. But I think more generally what they're beginning to really resonate to, and I've heard the story from several people, perhaps you have as well, these Silicon Valley types, many of whom have been doing lots of business, in fact, even with the People's Liberation Army, like Google, that won't do business with the American military, mind you, but they have, and I can't say it specifically in the case of Google, but in other cases at least, when they've had behind closed doors an opportunity to talk to people who they know talk to President Trump, they've actually thanked them for the hard line that the president has taken on China. He needs to take it more, and I think more comprehensively. This is not just about trade, Alex. This is about across the board. The Chinese government, the People's Republic of China, the Chinese Communist Party, however you want to define it, makes it absolutely clear they are intent on dominating the world.
Right, and we're complicit in their authoritarianism. We've enabled it in so many ways, and I think that historically, people need to put themselves in the shoes of an American 100 years from now And it's an impossible task, but if you do it, we're not going to look back on this time and feel great about enabling this. In fact, we might feel very badly about it.
Could I just make this one last point, because it's something we've needed an update on. We have been enabling it, most especially, unbeknownst to the vast majority of us, through the financing that we've been providing to the Chinese Communist Party and their companies. By some estimates, it's on the order of 15 or 14, at least $14 trillion that Americans and others in our markets have been investing in these Chinese companies. We've talked before about the Thrift Savings Plan, Alex, which is the federal government retirement system, which is poised to begin putting American government personnel, military as well as civilians, retirement funds into some of these same Chinese companies. I understand that Marco Rubio in the Senate and Mark Meadows in the House are introducing legislation this week, maybe as soon as today, to try to block that. I hope that we will find people rallying behind it. And again, I would encourage people who are interested in this to register their opposition to the idea of, for example, our military personnel's retirement funds being put into companies that are building weapon systems with which to kill us, to go to presentdangerchina.org, sign the petition, which we will be delivering quite probably this week, to oppose that kind of action.
Frank, incredible, and definitely keep up with what Frank's reporting. Frank, I got 3 more stories, and I got about 3 minutes. Can we do rapid fire? Yep. North Korea claiming that they've tested the super large multiple rocket launcher, or even multiples of those. Your reaction?
More of the same. The North Korean government is beavering away, building more capable weapon systems. I'm afraid, Alex, that a number of them, while they're being tested at the moment in a short-range mode, which we've signaled is okay,
yes,
will have relevance to longer-range military capabilities as well.
Sure, and I'm kind of doing the math here. There's no evidence that they're drawing down their nuclear program as far as we know, but we know it doesn't appear to be accelerating, but they're certainly doing these short, medium-range missiles that are as often as possible.
We don't know what they're actually doing deep underground. They bury most of what they have that they don't want us to see because they know that we can't detect it from overhead. So
they're acting as though they're sort of stymied, but that's a temporary thing that could change it in a moment.
I'm not sure they're acting as though they're stymied. They're acting as though they're still interested in having conversations with President Trump. But I think they're still going forward with their programs.
Okay, so how concerned should we be?
Very concerned, I believe.
Okay. That's not good.
No,
so I was hoping for a different answer, Frank. Syrian Christians taking up arms against Turkish invasion.
Look, there are still a few Christians left in that part of the world, which, after all, was the birthplace of Christianity. They need to be defended. The fact that they're taking up arms and, in fact, getting access to arms is, I think, a hopeful sign, because they're not likely to get protection from anybody else. But their numbers are so small that I'm afraid, especially against Turkish military, units, they're not going to be able to do much other than, fight last stands. But they deserve our strong support, Alex. We appreciate the work that you and Francis Martel have been doing to elevate the issue of the plight of persecuted Christians, something we're also working on at SaveThePersecutedChristians.org.
Okay, great. And the last topic for today, U.S. raising reward for an American missing in Iran, Robert Levinson, to $20 million. This is one that was not even on my radar. Tell us about Robert Levinson and why the reward is so big and what are the hurdles to getting him back.
Well, I think the Iranians refuse to acknowledge they even have him. I think it's the assessment of the U.S. government that they do. It's just another example of having seized an American and using him as effort to extract some sort of concessions from us. I think the fact that the Secretary of State raised the amount of money to this level is probably calculated to encourage not just information flows about this individual's plight, where he is, how he's being held, and so on, but also more generally to incentivize the Iranian people to think about what we really must be encouraging them to do, which is to end this regime. It's their enemy as well as ours.
So what do we do? How do we encourage the attention for this issue?
Well, again, I think this is a place where, the rhetoric of the United States government can be tremendously important. I remember vividly my old boss, Ronald Reagan, describing the evil empire. delegitimizing the Soviet Union. We need to be doing similar things with this Iranian regime. I think Mike Pompeo, the president, even have repeatedly done some things along this line, but solidarity with the people of Iran and demonstrating our desire for them, not us, but for them to free themselves of this regime, I think would go a long way.
Yeah, I hope that happens, and I hope in short order, though I'm certainly not going to hold my breath. But
40 years on, you can't hold your breath.
We can pray, though. Frank Gaffney, wonderful, as always. SecureFreedom.org, CounterJihad.com, PresentDangerChina.org, SaveThePersecutedChristians.org.
Yes,
all good stuff. Frank, we'll talk to you next week.